Hello friends, I'm George, the nice smelling gentleman. Welcome back to the channel guys, I hope that all of you are doing well. It's time for another episode of 5 original designer and niche fragrances and 10 of their cheaper but at the same time good alternatives. The first original fragrance that I'm going to give you alternatives for will be none other than the also famous Creed Aventus. Now, whether you like it or not, Creed Aventus is a super popular fragrance that just works up to this day. It's a very likable scent, very easy to wear, very versatile, works pretty much all year round and gets compliments. But there's one big problem with Creed Aventus, and that's the price. There aren't that many people that can actually afford to buy Creed Aventus. So let me give you two alternatives for Creed Aventus. The first one again will be a very famous fragrance, probably the most famous clone fragrance. It comes from the brand of Armaf and it's called Club de Nuit Intense Men. In this case I'm holding a bottle of the EDP variant. But all of the fragrances from this line, you know, the EDT, the EDP, the Pure Parfum, the limited edition Parfum, all of them are doing the same thing. They are cloning Creed Aventus. Now, in my opinion, the EDT at this point is not worth buying because it's just too sharp and too abrasive in the opening, just feels too synthetic. If you're going down the Armaf road, I'll definitely advise you to pick up either the EDP, the Pure Parfum or the limited edition Parfum. But I'm going to give you one additional alternative. It's a little bit less known and it comes from the brand of Khadlaj and it's called Infini Absolute. This one is again very heavily inspired by Creed Aventus itself, but this feels like a more fruity and more sweet take on the original DNA. It lacks, you know, some of that smokiness that you get out of the original fragrance. This feels like a slightly sweeter, more ambery, more fruity take. But undoubtedly it carries the Creed Aventus spirit. It carries that very similar DNA. It actually has surprisingly good quality, it has a surprisingly good performance, and all around, if you're looking and if you're wondering whether you should pick up the Club de Nuit Intense Men EDT version, I would say that in this case go for Infini Absolute because it's priced relatively at the same levels as the EDT variant of a Club de Nuit Intense Men, but in my opinion this fragrance has a better quality and maybe even slightly better performance than the current batches of the EDT. But if you're looking for something that has even better performance and you don't mind spending the extra money, in that case I would say go with the Club de Nuit Intense Men EDP or the other versions like the Pure Parfum and limited editions Parfum. The next original fragrance that I'm going to give you two alternatives for comes from Maison Francis Kurkdjian, or MFK for short, and it's one of their scents that's called Grand Soir. It's this very sweet ambery / vanillic fragrance that's perfectly unisex in my opinion. Some people think that it leans to the feminine side. It's a very nice sweet cold weather scent that has a very strong performance, but again MFK scents also tend to be very expensive and not too many people can actually afford to buy them. So let me give you two alternatives for Grand Soir. The first one comes from the brand of Lattafa and part of their Pride line, and it's called Eternal Oud. It comes very interestingly packaged, very uniquely packaged, like most other fragrances from the Pride line of Lattafa. The bottle looks like this. You get this metallic cap that looks like a tree, again half a tree on the front as well. And scent wise this is very similar to the original scent. This again relies very heavily on those sweet notes, you know, the benzoin, the vanilla, the amber. You get some ouds, maybe a hint of some spices, but it's all about the sweetness with this fragrance. Super sweet, like sticky sweet pretty much. Has a very strong performance, very strong projection, and all around is a great option if you're looking for something that scent wise will get you very close to Grand Soir. But lately I've come across another fragrance that is not so much a clone of Grand Soir like Eternal Oud is. It's more like an inspiration with a heavy twist, and it comes from the brand of FOMO and it's called Illusion d'un Soir. And this one is a very interesting take on the original DNA. This feels like it has a little bit more of a fruity type of sweetness in the opening and more like a sugary type of sweetness rather than ambery and vanillic sweetness, and that's the case especially in the opening. I also pick up a hint of a boozy note in here, a hint of tobacco note. It's like a very, minor twists here and there that are very interesting and just change a little bit the scent profile and may change it in a good way, in my opinion. It's a very strong fragrance. It's pretty much a beast mode performing scent, very loud, very long lasting, with very good quality. But again, like with the original fragrance, like with Eternal Oud, and that's especially the case with Illusion d'un Soir, you really need to make sure that you like sweet fragrances in order to enjoy this one. If I have to pick up one, if you want to get closer to the original fragrance, I would say go with Eternal Oud, but if you're looking for something with monstrous performance, then you can check out Illusion d'un Soir from FOMO. The next original fragrance that I'm going to give you a couple of alternatives for is called Ganim Mate, another of those very famous fragrances, niche fragrances in the community. And it's a very interesting scent. The original carries this very interesting scent profile that relies heavily on the so-called mineralic notes. That is, that scent is really unique. So again, like with any other niche fragrance, it tends to be quite expensive. So let me give you two cheaper options. The first one comes from the house of Paris Corner and the Emir line, and it's called Celestial. And this is probably the first Middle Eastern clone of Ganim Mate that actually, started to pick up some hype and become famous. And to this day, in my opinion, this is the closest thing to Ganim Mate that you can get when it comes to Middle Eastern fragrances. It carries a very similar scent profile, maybe lacks a bit of that sharpness, that mineralic, so-called mineralic sharpness that the original fragrance has. Maybe feels a hint more spicy and a hint sweeter compared to the original fragrance, but nonetheless it carries a very similar scent profile, has pretty decent performance, and all around is closer to the original fragrance than the other alternative that I'm going to give you for Ganim Mate. But if you're not a huge fan of the original scent, if you want something with a bit of a twist, something that's a bit sweeter and maybe a little bit more mass appealing and a little bit easy to wear, then you can check out Lattafa Masa. Again, this one is part of the Lattafa Pride line, and that's why it comes uniquely packaged and in a unique bottle. This is also very similar to Ganim Mate and to Celestial, but this one is a little bit more fruity, a little bit sweeter. It has an interesting sort of a fruity note in the opening. It has a hint of a sort of a bubblegummy opening, and then on the dry down actually becomes again pretty similar like Celestial to the original fragrance. But all around, I think this is a little bit more mass appealing, maybe a little bit more unisex and a little bit more wearable. And again, if you're looking for something, it also has pretty strong performance as well. So if you want something that will get you closer to the original fragrance, then you can go with Celestial from Paris Corner. But if you want something with an interesting sort of a fruity, sweeter twist on the original DNA, then you can go with Lattafa Masa. The next fragrance that I'm going to give you a couple of alternatives for actually is going to be a design noir. It comes from the brand of Jean-Paul Gaultier, and it's called Le Mot Le Parfum. And I'm a really huge fan of the original fragrance, one of my most favorite designer scents. But again, like any high-end designer scent, it tends to be on the costly side, especially in the past couple of years. So let me give you two alternatives. The first one comes from the brand of Maison Alhambra, and it's called Glacier Le Noir. And this one is not a bad take on the original DNA, although to be honest, since the day I got it, I've been slightly disappointed with this fragrance. Initially, the first reason why I was a bit disappointed was because of the performance, although that's improved a little bit with time and maceration. The second reason why I was a little bit disappointed with Glacier Le Noir was because of the scent, and because it's, especially at first, this didn't seem to be as close to the original as I hoped it would be. It still carries a pretty similar DNA, but it lacks a bit of the powderiness that I get out of the original fragrance, and also lacks a bit of the sweetness that I get out of the original fragrance. Now, with some maceration, this actually improved a little bit, but still to this day, I can't say that I feel that Maison Alhambra have done a great job with Glacier Le Noir. So let me give you a second option. that in my opinion is actually better. It comes from the brand of Fragrance World and it's called Gustav Homme Le Parfum. Again, very similar to the original fragrance, but this actually, in my opinion, is better. It has a higher quality and stronger cardamom note, which brings it closer to the original fragrance. It has a little bit stronger iris and more powdery iris note that again gets it closer to the original fragrance, and also has more vanillic sweetness on the dry down. And all around, I think this is the better option simply because it gets closer to the original scent. Performance-wise, they're pretty much on par, although I would say that Gustav Homme actually is a little bit better performing than Glacier Le Noir. So if I have to choose just one in this case, I would go with Gustav Homme Le Parfum. And the last original fragrance that I'm going to give you two alternatives for will be again a niche one. It comes from the brand of Parfums de Marly and it's called Carlisle. And it's an absolutely fantastic creation from Parfums de Marly. It's a very dark, very sweet, very boozy, spicy fragrance that also relies heavily on the note of tobacco. It's an absolutely fantastic performer and it's an absolutely fantastic cold weather scent, and I absolutely love it. But again, it's a niche fragrance and tends to be very expensive. So I'm going to give you two alternatives for Carlisle. The first one comes from the brand of Fragrance World, and can you guess how it's called? Well, it's called Carlisle. For some reason, Fragrance World in this case decided to go straight up, cloning the scent and cloning the name as well. And it's actually a very good fragrance, one of the latest Fragrance World pickups that I've added to my collection. And actually, I was really surprised by the quality of this scent. It's very similar to the original fragrance, but to my nose this feels like a slightly more boozy take on the original DNA. Other than that, it carries pretty much the same scent profile. It still has a lot of sweetness, it still has a tobacco note, still has the woodsy notes on the dry down, some of the spices, but again just feels like a slightly boozier take on the original DNA. It's quite a strong fragrance, projects really nicely, has a very good performance on skin, and all around this is actually surprisingly good in my opinion, simply because I was able to pick this one up for a very cheap price. But I can give you a second alternative that's also very cheap, and at the same time it's also very nicely done. It comes from the brand of Maison Alhambra and it's called Cassius, and it's one of my most favorite Maison Alhambra fragrances. Again, very similar to the original fragrance. And again, this has a slight twist. The opening is slightly rougher, just like Carlisle from Fragrance World is as well. You cannot expect to get the same quality out of a $20 fragrance like you would get with $250, $300 fragrance. But still, this actually is really nicely done. This feels like a slightly sweeter take on the original DNA. It still carries though that boozy notes, it has the tobacco, it has the woods, the spices, all around a very interesting take, and very good take actually on the Carlisle DNA. And again, like Carlisle from Fragrance World, this is very strong, projects really nicely and tends to be very long lasting on skin. If I have to pick up one out of the two, this will be a very tough choice, but I'll personally go with Cassius, but this is the winner in this case by a very slim margin. Carlisle from Fragrance World actually is also surprisingly good, so if you don't mind getting a slightly boozier take on the original DNA, you can safely go with Carlisle, because this is also pretty good and has a very good performance. But again, my personal winner will be Cassius from Maison Alhambra. And so guys, in today's video I gave you 10 more cheap but at the same time good alternatives for 5 famous designer and niche fragrances. I hope that you found this video interesting. If you did, give it a like, and I also hope that you're going to join me in the next one. And until then, stay safe and bye bye.